So we're taking a look here at a downy feather. This is from a ring-necked dove. And you can really see the scale here because you also see in view the end of a toothpick. So this is quite a small feather. Now what makes downy feathers unique from other feathers is that the whole feather has what we would call a plumulacious vein. So the end of that toothpick is pointing at the base of the central shaft. And remember, the shaft that has a vein on it we call the Rakus. And of course, this downy feather's vein is completely plumulacious. And so that means that each individual little barb that's sticking out from it doesn't hook together and create a solid surface like you would see in a wing feather or a tail feather. So I'm going to point here without trying to disturb the image too much with a hypodermic needle. Very small needle here. And so here you can see I'm pointing to the central Rakus right here. And each little branch that's coming off of it, like a branch on a tree, we call those barbs. As you can see, it's quite fuzzy and soft, and that's because each barb has hundreds of barbules branching off of it. So I'm going to zoom in here. We're going to zoom in quite a bit here. Now going right down the center of our field of view, focused right now. So right down the middle, from top to bottom, this is an individual barb on our downy feather. And you can see that barb in turn has many other branches coming off of it to the left and to the right. Each of those branches are barbules. Now, if we were looking at a wing feather or a tail feather or the top of a contour feather, we would see that these individual barbules that are pointing left and right would have microstructures on them like little hooks that we would call hooklets or barbicles. Now, the downy feather does not have these. There are no hooklets. And it's the reason why it has its very characteristic soft and fuzzy look and shape. You might notice all of these little dots on the individual barbules. It kind of looks like dew on a spider web. These are nodes. So instead of hooklets, the barbules of downy feathers have nodes. Just sort of a little clump of keratin where the barbule gets a little thicker. And as we zoom out again, you can see that it just creates this sort of spiderwebby mess. As all of those barbules on each barb sort of intertwine with all the others, making this very soft kind of cotton ball shape. And so it's this big network, and you can imagine this feather on the body underneath contour feathers of this dove. There are literally hundreds, thousands of these feathers, all creating this very soft, fuzzy hodgepodge of intertwining barbs and these many little barbules with their little nodes. And it creates on a microscopic level a mesh that makes it hard for air to kind of move in and out. Air acts sort of like a viscous liquid on that level. And so the warm air gets trapped and is unable to really freely move in and out of this network of little barbules with their nodes. And so what we have here is the Rakus on the wing feather of a barred owl. So if you remember from class, the Rakus is that central shaft. It's essentially a hollow tube of keratin. And out from the Rakus protrude the barbs. And since this is a flight feather, they're all zipped together to make this continuous surface that we call a plumulacious vein of the feather. I'm going to move things here. I'm going to go down the Rakus. So we were distal. Now we're moving down to the proximal end, so we're getting closer to where this feather would have been attached to the body. And before long, we start to lose the barbs, as you can see. And so we no longer have a vein. So what we have here is part of the shaft that does not have any barbs. We call this the calamus. And there's the very end that would have attached inside the skin, inside the follicle. So now moving back up to where the barbs start, and now we have a nice vein. You can see that the barred owl's feather has a unique pattern of pigmentation on the vein. Now we're at the very, what we call distal end. Of the feather. Now it's getting real shaky because I'm zooming in so much. You can start to see the microstructures coming off of the barbs that we call barbules. So let's zoom in and take a look at those. All right, so what we have here is the end of the edge of the vein on our barred owl flight feather, wing feather, one of the remiges. And so you can see that the big lines are the individual barbs, and the little wispy structures branching off are the barbules. And on the barbules are little hooks and ridges that we call hooklets or barbicels, so that they can stick together. And you can actually see a point here where two barbs are unzipping. And so let me attempt to find it here with my, oh, there we go, lucky. So this is my hypodermic needle, and I'm like, even just that's my breath blowing the feather. All right, so right here is sort of the area where these two barbs are unzipped. But if you go inward, you sort of see right here they start to zip together. I'll see if I can't sort of like move things around and unzip it a bit. And so you can see just how impossibly small these structures are. And as I'm moving it, try to see You can tell that those individual loose barbules, in kind of the same way that we saw in the downy feather, they're not sort of smooth structures, right? They've got some kind of texture to them that, again, kind of looks like little dewdrops on a spider web. And so what you're seeing there, the individual hooklets on each individual barbule that they use to connect together. See if I can really kind of pull things apart here. All right, so you can see as I'm pulling up, it's dragging the other one with it. And then, oh, there we go. And they eventually unhook if I pull hard enough. So that are these tiny little structures on our flight feather. Okay, now we're looking at the flight feather of a barn owl. Right, so different than the barred owl that we saw before. You can see on the leading edge of our feather, we have these fringed tips. So these are the edges of the individual barbs. And they have modified barbules that don't have the little hooklets on them, or the barbicels. And so this portion of our barbules, or this portion of our individual barbs, don't zip together with the adjacent barb because the barbicels are relatively hookless. As you can see for scale, this is a hypodermic needle. And the function of this is that it breaks up the air that's moving over the feather. So as the owl is flying through the air, this would be the leading edge. So this is the first part of the wing that is encountering the air, and it breaks up, it prevents turbulence. So little sort of whirlwinds of air, and turbulence creates noise. So this aids in its silent flight. See if I can't zoom in a little bit more. Find it here with my needle. There we go. So that right there is one barb from bottom left to upright, swooping upwards. And then below it, here's another barb. And you can see protruding up and down are all the barbules that aren't long enough to hook onto the barbules of the barb that's above and below. And now for our last feather, we're going back to our ring-necked dove. And now we're not dealing with a downy feather, but we're dealing with a contour feather. Now the defining characteristic of the contour feather is that it has a good, healthy portion of the vein that is pennaceous, which is you get a pennaceous feather when the barbs zip together and create a pretty smooth, solid surface. Oh, the static electricity is incredible, which we're looking at right now. And you can see dividing your screen left and right is that central shaft, the Rakus, that tapers off and becomes quite thin at the bottom, which would be the most distal end of the contour feather. And contour feathers also have a very healthy portion of plumulacious vein made of downy barbs. There at the bottom, the most proximal end where it would attach to the body. So contour feathers are responsible for, as you might expect, gives the animal its shape. It's by far the most numerous body feathers, and it has important function in helping in waterproofing, keeping the bird warm with that the plumulacious proximal end, and gives birds that very smooth contour when you see them up close, right? Most birds don't look like a big fuzzball, except for young birds, nestlings and chicks, because they don't have contour feathers. They're primarily downy feathers. But that smooth contour is all due to the pennaceous part that we see up here, and if I can get the feather to stay still, we'll zoom in a little bit. So here we're looking at a pretty good plumulation portion of the feather. And you might notice again, just like in the downy feathers, we've got those nodes that are on the individual barbules. And I'll attempt to put my needle in view here just so you can see how small we are. There we go. So this is a hypodermic needle. A little bit smaller than the needle that would give you a vaccine. And I'll sort of move it so we can take a look at the contour portion, or the pennaceous portion of the contour feather. All right, this is as zoomed in as much as we can. Let's see if I can. So that's the end of the Rakus, where it gets super thin near the distal end. There we go. And so all the horizontal lines are individual barbs. And branching off above and below are the barbules, which in turn have barbicil structures or hooklets. Yeah. So there's our video whirlwind of a handful of different feathers and examining the structures under the microscope. We've got one more little bonus section here at the end. We're looking at the back side of our barred owl flight feather. And we're going to take a look at the water repellent properties of our feathers. So feathers are made out of beta keratin, which is a protein that is very water insoluble. So you can stick a feather in water and it's not gonna break down. So where are we? Okay, there we go. Finally found one. There we go. So there's our water drop. So I'm zoomed out as much as I can here while still being in focus. And so you see how it just beads up. It doesn't soak in. But then let me see if I can try to get this to roll. There it goes. And we have a very dry feather. It's also a good video just to see how thick water is, those hydrogen bonds. You know, I mean, this really doesn't look like the liquid that we're used to. It kind of looks like a jello, doesn't it? And so we looked at, under the microscope, you know, what this vein looks like. And it's not completely solid, right? It's, when you get close, you can see that the hooklets on the barbules, there's empty space there, but the water can't get through. And I'm pushing pretty hard here with the needle. So you can see that going from the roughly horizontal from bottom left to upper right are the individual barbs. And in between the barbs are a mesh of the barbules that are zipped together because of the barbicels, or the hooklets that are on those barbules. And even though there's empty space there, air can move through these feathers, but the water cannot. This water is full of hydrogen bonds that makes the molecules real sticky. I'll show you what that looks like here. It's my needle. I'm going to poke through, bust through the veins here. There we go. And now I'm opening it up, unzipping. The water has a chance to soak through now, as I'm breaching the zipped up barbules, and forcing the barbs apart. There we go. So the water, at least some of the droplet, was able to get through because I broke it. So even there, you can see that the droplet is still spanning that big gap. So up close, you can see how feathers aid birds in being waterproof, or at least water resistant.